Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Big news today on Mercedes and their future going into 2023. Helmut Marko and even Charles Leclerc agreeing that Mercedes will be back in force next season and arguably the key contenders to watch out for next year, especially because their car has finally started up for the first time. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, news from the Scuderia Ferrari camp confirming the date of their car launch. We saw the date of Aston Martin's car launch a few days ago, I don't know if it was the 13th of February or maybe the 6th of February, something around early February is generally where they do it. And Ferrari are launching on Valentine's Day. So as they say, are you ready to fall in love? 14th of February is going to be when the new car arrives. So this is kind of a sketch up they've done. Similar looking, of course, I'm sure it's going to be to this year's Ferrari, but this year's Ferrari was absolutely beautiful. So hopefully we get more of the same. But yeah, only about 54 days away until there's a glimpse of the Ferrari F1 car. And yes, in fairness, sometimes they do the car launch and then the actual car they turn up to the first race with is rather different. As we saw in fact with Mercedes car last season, they had a very kind of traditional conservative approach with their side pod and just general design that they released with the car, and then when they actually turned up to Bahrain they had a rather different thing going on. And also Red Bull, I believe, just released like the stock version with no additions at all. They just had the livery on the stock version of the car, and they didn't want to give anything at all away to the competition with regard to how good their car was when they launched it. But probably this year a slightly different story on that front. Now Helmut Marko did a mega interview with Amos over the last couple of days and was discussing Ferrari, Mercedes, all these other topics. One very interesting talking point he made was about Ferrari and their team getting weaker with Binotto leaving. So he believes quite clearly that Binotto getting fired is not a good decision by Ferrari and that they will live to regret it. So even as he got asked the question, do you see your opponents being weakened, instability at the top of things? Helmut Marko says, kind of chief advisor to Red Bull really, in the case of Ferrari, I don't understand the change. I rate Binotto as an excellent engineer and politician. With the new man, that being Fred Vasseur, who has many other jobs, I see a weakening for Ferrari. That's an interesting point, right? Because you bring in a new guy. Yes, Fred Vasseur has also done other roles and such for Alfa Romeo over the last couple of seasons, but now he comes in here to Ferrari and he has to kind of build up certain things from the ground up again, right? Of course, when Binotto's in charge for quite some time, he has everything kind of working over like a ticking clock, and Fred Vasseur's got to come in, deal with the engine department, deal with the strategy department, build all these things up, build the relationships, maybe fire some people, bring some new people in if he has the power to do so by the higher ups. And yeah, that does create some instability and some chaos within that camp. Charles Leclerc and others don't believe it's going to affect them too badly, but you can't rule out the potential instability that will create. This also a note on AlphaTauri, because there has been some rumors lately about the possibility of another organization buying the AlphaTauri team, currently effectively a sister team to Red Bull. That's been the case since they were Toro Rosso, right, for many a year. But there's been some talk, could they get sold to Porsche? Could they get sold to Andretti, right, for a new team to come through? And actually Helmut Marko says quite outright that look, it was not satisfactory, their performance last season. For their potential, technically and financially, 9th place is not acceptable. They fell off like 75% of their points in 2021, just disappeared going into last season. So he's not acceptable. Well, he's not believing that performance was acceptable, but he has kind of stated that they're not interested in selling that team as it stands. But whether that story changes in the future, I don't know. It's a decent possibility, I think, that does happen in the future, that AlphaTauri does get sold on or something else happens there, and maybe AlphaTauri as the brand, the fashion brand or whatever, gets kind of integrated more into the Red Bull side than into its own Formula 1 team as it presently stands. Now, later in the article, he was asked the question, who do you fear more next year? Which team is the team to beat next season for the Red Bull side? And Helmut Marko explicitly says Mercedes is the one to beat. Definitely Mercedes. They are more stable and they have Hamilton. I don't know what this kind of strange arc is for Helmut Marko, praising Hamilton every other week at this point, but he's done it again. Even though it didn't go well for him this year, his lap times showed that he is a top man. They are simply a stronger package than Ferrari, stating that not just the drivers, not just potentially the car, but also strategy, other operational factors. Mercedes, the 8-time consecutive Constructors' Champions for a reason. In terms of the overall package, they should still be the threat you would imagine next season to Red Bull over Ferrari if they can get a car that's relatively on par, and I think they've got the driver part of the equation sorted, whereas Ferrari, there's still some questions to me. I do like Sainz and Leclerc, but I also do wonder how they're going to treat that internally next year at Ferrari. I don't think they give their drivers, or let's say their lead driver, the best opportunity at Ferrari, because they love to stick to this whole, there's no number one driver idea. They often were giving Sainz preferential treatment in strategy, despite the fact that it was quite clear that if they really wanted to win the Drivers' Championship, Leclerc from quite early on had to be favoured, just how they do at Red Bull. and usually how they do it at Mercedes, if they've got a driver that's actually in the position to win, and if they have two drivers that are both just dominating the championship together, they'll generally let them fight. Whereas if Ferrari want to really compete, they probably have to think a little bit differently about how they manage that going forwards, and that's still a question to me whether they will come to maybe a more competitive decision, let's say, next season. But even Leclerc agrees with Helmut Marko and says, yes, Mercedes will definitely be the team back in the fight, who reckons there could be a three-way battle. And speaking of that, right, the W14, according to Formula Uno, has now been fired up for the first time. So in fairness, like, just because the car's been fired up doesn't really mean anything. They put an engine in, they turn it on, and the car technically goes. So I guess fair play. But still pretty cool to think about, right? We're probably, as we saw with Ferrari, about 50 or so days away from the launch of the car. There's obviously will be development continuing on through the entirety of the winter, but nonetheless, Mercedes are going into next season, probably their team expected to make a rather significant rebound. There's some other teams that we'd expect to make a rebound, Alpha Tauri being among them, but nonetheless, it's kind of unclear whether they really understood and are able to solve their issues going into next season, whereas Mercedes, we did see an awful lot of that last year, and their car was largely competitive at certain tracks, but most tracks was absolutely terrible, at least ones that had any straights. We'll see if they can deal with any of those issues next year, and also whether they can possibly match what Red Bull have achieved with dropping the weight of their car down significantly, which we believe Mercedes will also have to do if they want to be competitive going forwards. So Charles Leclerc agrees and says, yeah, Mercedes will definitely be there with a very strong car next year. Hopefully it will be a three-team fight, and we can only be hopeful that was the case. I think at the start of the season there was some hope that, you know what, Red Bull and Ferrari are on level pegging, Mercedes will catch up in like 10 races, and then we'll have a cracking fight. There really was only a couple of races. I mean, Brazil, there was maybe a six-way fight you could consider because, you know, both the Red Bulls, both the Ferraris, both the Mercedes were kind of in the mix there. Outside of that, we never really had it, to be fair. So we'll see how that goes this season. And even Helmut Marko went on to say that they're the more stable team. Mercedes, they've got Hamilton, who's a very special driver. So, I mean, yeah, maybe Helmut Marko's just kind of, you know, had enough of criticizing Hamilton over the years and now realizes, oh, damn, Hamilton's going to retire in a couple of years and I won't be able to talk all this trash anymore. I better be nice to him for a while. But, I mean, yeah, seems to flip-flop quite a bit on this topic as well. The other thing I wanted to mention before we close out here is on Mercedes' new reserve driver in Mick Schumacher, who's given his thoughts on whether he can be the F1 champion one day. Says, I'm an F2 and F3 champion. People forget that. I do have a feeling I can get on top of Formula 1 in the sense that I am capable of winning the title at the right time in the right car. I do love statements like this, and I don't really understand why people always criticize the drivers so heavily for statements like this. Every single time I see a statement like this from any driver, it's always like, oh, this guy is trash, there's no way he knows what he's talking about. And I feel like the people who generally criticize these statements are people that, like, they don't have the ambition to actually achieve something of substance anyway. And I mean, look, if you're a Formula 1 driver without the attitude that you can win in the best car, like, what are you even there for at the end of the day? And it's good to see that Mick Schumacher actually has that kind of fire within him and belief in him, that look, he's won the F2, won the F3, why can't he win the F1 at the right time in the right car? And maybe if he proves to be very successful behind the scenes at Mercedes, there might be a seat for him down the line as well. And even speaking of this, just because we do believe that the chances are potentially that maybe Audi, right, as they come in 2026, or maybe even slightly earlier than that, with the Sauber outfit, might be looking to get Mick Schumacher in. That would make so much sense, right, given the German heritage obviously there. And actually Vettel and Mick Schumacher will both race for Team Germany at the 2023 Race of Champions. I believe they hold it in the north of Sweden. And there has been some talk about whether there's any possibility in a couple of years' time that Vettel makes a return alongside Mick Schumacher to become an all-German driver outfit for the German team in Audi, which may or may not be the case. And also there's that discussion, as we discussed with Ferrari and Mercedes, whether there's any further drama at Red Bull that also means that Mercedes are going to be a more competitive car compared to the rest of the grid. But very much enjoy your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.